My name is Scott Quimby from Computer Systems Integrators. Today we're going to talk about Windows Logon performance and talk about some issues and best practices and the like. So if you have questions, put them in the chat box, please. Lisa's out there someplace. She can keep me honest in terms of questions. All right, factors that affect Logon performance. We start with the basics: workstation server performance, the CPU, NIC, RAM. If your workstation sucks, you have an old, Optiplex Windows XP machine with 1 gig of RAM, you're probably not doing it. I can't fix that part. That's just have good equipment. Now, most of you do have good equipment by now. Network performance, wired versus Wi-Fi, especially with Wi-Fi. Is it oversubscribed? What are you doing in terms of all those different frequencies? Bob has talked about turning off certain bandwidths to improve performance, high-density wireless, things like that. Login scripts. Login scripts are the bane of basically Logon performance. We all started out with the batch file, CMD, whatever, logon.bat, mapping drives and the like. It works perfectly fine. You pay a huge price for that. A huge price in terms of Logon. So we've been recommending now for a couple years that people that have batch files switch to group policy preference extension drive mappings. So if you haven't done that, you need to do that, and that's pretty simple to do, and if you need help, certainly let us know. VB scripts. We got into VB scripts mostly originally because Microsoft was so primitive in batch files with logic as compared to the people in Novell. So when we wanted to do if group equals admin users or office users, then map whatever, that was mindless to do in Novell. But batch files in Microsoft didn't lend itself to that. So what we did is we used VB scripts so we could do logic and tests for things. And it works really well, except it's wicked slow. And again, if you're using VB scripts for that, or VB scripts for data collection, you need to not do that. PowerShell, newer version of the same thing. There's a price there. There's been a little bit of debate as to how much the price is. I talked about that last Tech Talk, I think, either last one or two. They've all come together with all the snow days we've had. But PowerShell is, there's a hit for that. Or you can have none, which is the best answer, and then do GPPE, drive maps. Desktop and shortcut delivery methods. This is huge. I did a thing on desktop delivery last time. We did this as a webinar, and you can get that online if you want it on our website, the recording. But you pay a huge price if you're still doing shared desktops and shared start menus. It costs you between 45 seconds and 90 seconds to do a shared desktop or shared start menu. Folder redirection is painful. All right, what do we want to do? We want to do GPPE shortcuts or have the shortcuts already there or some combination. Roaming profiles. We went with roaming profiles because it allowed us to do mass customization. Roaming profiles could add a minute, 90 seconds to Logon because we're pulling all this stuff up and pulling all this stuff down, and it's really, really a lot of time there. Now, Windows 10 and roaming profiles hasn't been a happy experience So there's reasons to lose that as well. Unfortunately, some of the other alternatives like user virtualization experience, user experience virtualization, have had some issues too in Windows 10. So it's just a bad thing. Now, why do we do roaming profiles? Mass customization. It was great. You put whatever setting, the settings follow you around. It's wonderful. However, now we should really take a hard look at roaming profiles if you're still using them. Excuse me there, I'm going to have some water. Hope my voice holds out. Roaming profiles, what we're going to do, only transient users that need mass customization should have a roaming profile. If you sit at your desk and it's your desk and you never move, then you shouldn't have a roaming profile. Excuse me. A lot of times that we have roaming profiles and the people never move. If you're a VDI user like View, terminal services, if you're using a fat Outlook client and you're moving around, sorry, we're going to need to have a roaming profile. But short of that, we don't. Now, that creates some startup issues. We'll talk about that down the line. Startup options. What's starting when you start your machine in the startup folder in services? And then we're going to talk about some policy design. What we should get, first login and new location. If we do everything I'm saying, we probably get under 2 minutes. Sometimes 45 seconds to 90 seconds is kind of a sweet spot, depending on the image. Second login, 6 to 8 seconds. With dry mapping shortcuts, everything delivered. So, if you're not getting that, do this and you will. All right. If your network is slow, your logins will be slow. Unmanaged switches. Switch density versus upload speed. You know, you get these 4-port switches, 10, 100, 1,000, what have you, and then what you get is you have an upload port. Well, if your upload port doesn't have enough bandwidth for whatever your workstation ports are, you're going to be sucking air at some standpoint. Now, most of you have dealt with this, but if you haven't dealt with this, this is your problem. So 4-port, 10, 100, whatever, and a 100 uplink, you only have 100 to go up. We talked about wireless, oversubscribed, slow. Remember, this is shared network. Wireless is, it's not switch network. So you really, as you get into these high densities, you really have to design that right. And I know Bob's been spending a lot of time, at least has been spending a lot of time with many of you, talking about how to deal with pervasive wireless so that your performance can really be good. If your workstation's slow, it's going to be slow. RAM is your friend. Adequate disk space, especially the older machines, they get backed up. This is huge. Back-end servers, if they're slow, login will be slow. That's data servers and that's domain controllers. I generally won't put anything on the network that's at least 2 vCPUs, 8 gig of RAM, and in VMware, the VMX 3 NIC. Back-end storage is slow. Your login will be slow. Evan tells the story in the office here when we put the Nimble SSD SAN array in. The ladies in the office loved them because the performance just so dramatically changed for what they were doing. 10 gig NICs between your VMware host and your storage. So the better your back end is, the better your front end is. We see this, especially as years go by since you've done upgrades. If your hosts are slow or oversubscribed, your servers are going to be slow. We look for balloon memory resource oversubscriptions. We see that in Paladin Sentinel if you're using that, and you probably see notes from me if you're on the edge of that stuff. But it can destroy it. We had a case the other day with a server that went nuts here because of a Windows Update problem in the office. VMware balloon memory, it just ate the life out of the entire office, and everybody was screaming. Resources is really important on the back end. Sites and services. I just did a presentation on this at the last Tech Talk. Remember, if you're not doing sites and services and you have multiple DCs spread out, your VLAN goes to the least busy domain controller in your network, which could be across town, could be a POSI's, could be, not your desired choice. Sites and services allows you to say this VLAN authenticates to the closest DC, keep everything close, keep everything fast. If that one's not there, then we'll go to the least busy. But if you're not doing sites and services right, that's what's going on. I've seen a bunch of things. Those of you, again, with Paladin Sentinel, been getting love notes from me because you've been bringing up more VLANs for secure wireless and this and that and the other thing. And then all of a sudden I see that the elementary school, is not defined as sites and services, and so it's going across town, and it's basically not optimized because the domain controller is sitting right there. Like I said, I did a presentation on that. What was it? Seems like 2 weeks ago, with all the snow back up for all the dates. Asynchronous versus synchronous login. The default in Microsoft, starting with Windows XP, was async. And the basic gist of that is I'd rather be fast than correct. I'd rather, give you a fast desktop than give you a good desktop. And the rationale is eventually things will get there. And if you're not a transient user, which most of our users are transient users, if you're not a transient user and you basically sit in the same seat every day to the end of time on the same machine, then the fact that the second or third login in the same place will get you all your stuff to the end of time is not a hardship. But if you're a transit user and the kid goes to the library and signs in the library, they need all the stuff to work in the library right then. They don't have another time. And Microsoft says that the things most likely to take a while to get there on the second or third login are home directories and drive mappings. So again, we can't really leave the network async for a login because most of our users are transients, and there's not a second time. If they don't get the drive map, if they don't get the home directory, if they don't get whatever we intended, then they're screwed, and they're not going to get a good user experience. So synchronous says I'd rather be correct, even if it's somewhat slower. So we basically, have to set our networks to be synchronous for things like home directories and drive mappings. And everything I've ever touched is set that way. Now there's two places. There's a computer login script and there's a user login script. And if we look up here, run login script synchronously, that is the setting. So the default is async. So again, if you're running a login script against the computer, you go on the computer side, or you're on the user side. Most people have it against the user, so most people would be the user side. But because of the nature of transient users, we need to be correct, even if it costs us some time. The other one that we always have to set is wait for the network at login. And that's Computer Configuration Policies Administrative Template System Logon. and then there's always wait for the computer to start up and log on. What this says is, you know, don't just hang out and say, hey, I'm here, you got anything for me? All right, I'm moving on, and then not actually deliver the policies and the settings that you want. What this says is, I got to have whatever it is you want me to have, and I'm going to sit there and I'm going to wait. You especially see erratic behavior with that in wireless. So if you don't have always wait for the network at startup and login, some wireless may get a little screwy that you say, sometimes I get my stuff, sometimes I don't. It's very weird. The other thing you can do to kind of figure out what to figure out here is you can go into this setting, computer configuration, policies, administrative templates, system display, highly detailed status messages, otherwise known as verbose mode. And what this does is this takes that little pinwheel preparing desktop or starting Windows, and it actually breaks it out, and it shows you that dialogue of what is actually running. So you sit there and you just see this pinwheel spin for 2 minutes or 6 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it is, however good or bad it is, all right, and you have no idea what this thing is really choking on. But if you turn on verbose mode here, what will happen is it'll say setting up user profile, setting up user desktop, setting up drive mappings, and the like, and you'll see each section. So if you, at that point, if you see it just pinwheel on one of those names, you know what it is. Whether it's you know, if it's setting up the user profile, it's still on the workstation. It's the workstation that is doing it. If you see it sitting there on folder redirection, it's because you're doing shared desktop and shared start menus, and it's just sucking air there. So you can at least see what it is that you're doing. And the weird thing we've seen in turning on verbose mode, in many cases, and this has happened all over the place, there seems to be a psychological effect for end users that the fact that the pinwheel actually says different words makes people more patient. It didn't make it any faster, but the fact that they see some sort of dialogue, it makes people more patient in a lot of cases. And again, you can see what you're choking on. Hey, it went through, you know, registry instantly. It went through user profile instantly. It's not my workstation. It's not that. It's choking on shared folder redirection. It's choking on drive mappings, whatever. You can at least see that and have something to focus on. Now, the other side of this, and if you're really, really trying to parse this and say, I need to just absolutely know everything there is to know, here's the TechNet article in the SQL and Windows debug file on the workstation. By turning on a couple registry keys, which you could push out with GPPE, you set up a user environment log file. And if you start trolling this file over and over again, you're going to start to see patterns of what's going on. And this is the absolute method of knowing what's exactly going on in your world from the workstation perspective. But you got to turn on the registry key, and then you got to troll on the actual workstation, not the server, for these files, and start reading them. And if you start reading them, you will know. If you're really, you know, going, hey, I got 6-minute logins, and I don't know why, you want to start doing that. Batch files. Batch files are very slow. Don't use them. Use GPP drive mappings. VB is very slow. Don't use them. Use GPP. PowerShell is very slow, at least on first login, use GPPE. Remember, you can have log on and log off scripts. Often, what you get into, too, is you get into the black screen. And basically, by rule, Microsoft says that if I go, let's say I map a drive to a folder that no longer exists, or I no longer have rights to, what's going to happen is it's going to take 10 minutes to time out. Now, invariably, your users are going to say the screen was black. That's the first thing they're going to say. And they're going to say, oh, it was like 30 minutes. Well, it wasn't 30 minutes. It was 10 minutes. But if you start saying, I got a lot of drive mappings that are messed up, you know, and you're doing batch files or VB scripts, all of a sudden, you know, why do I feel the sucking sound when I sign in? That's why. All right. GPPE timeouts are more like 30 seconds for a drive map that you don't have rights to. Still not a good thing, but better than 10 minutes. And now, what I'll do, you go and you look at red X's. If you look in drive mappings and you have persistent drive mappings with red X's that you can't click on as people, then you got this condition. You know, summer came, you reorganized, and you messed up your mappings, and you got persistent trapped, and you're getting these 10-minute timeouts as people try to log in. What then I'll do is I'll do a log out script, which is basically a net use asterisk /del/yes, basically to delete all drive maps on logout, to kill all persistent drive maps, and then put back via GPPE the drive maps that I want each time, to try to get rid of all those little, you know, dead maps that are creating these, you know, 10-minute logouts or whatever. So generally what I'll do is I'll put one of those in, I'll let it run, log off for a while to clean stuff up, then I'll pull it. But if somebody else has put something in log off, you should check both log on and log off. The other thing, you got people doing this, and you know it's good stuff, except for the performance hit you take is huge. Again, things like Bell Arc hardware, you know, where it has a nice, here's your IP address, here's your name, it takes the inventory, land sweeper, these type of things, running in login scripts, it's death. All right, it's death in terms of login. What you should really try to do is you should use a GPPE to set up a scheduled task to run the things you want from the workstation, as opposed to running it from the login script. And I know a lot of you do that because you like what the information provides, but you're taking a horrific logon hit for that. How do we find the login scripts? It's either computer configuration policies, Windows settings scripts, or user. Most times it's user because, you know, the user is getting the drives they need. Remember, there's a startup and shutdown. So if you're auditing your stuff, you should look in both. What do we like instead? GPPE drive maps. All right, here's an example. We've basically user configuration, preferences, Windows settings, drive maps, and we've set up 2 drive maps here. Same thing. This is like instantaneous, and in Windows 8 and higher, these are also can be dynamic. So normally drive maps where you log in and you get your maps, and if I edit this on the fly, until you log in again, you don't get your maps. But in Windows 8 and higher, what they did is they said GPPE drive maps on the user side can come in dynamically. So if I map a drive Z to common /assignments right now, and I assign it to the student group at the high school, it's going to, if it's Windows 8 or higher, it's going to just automatically appear without them relogging in. It's kind of cool. Again, make sure all drive maps are accessible. Red X's in my computer. This is huge. People got this all over the place. So look for that. Look for red X's. And you might want to do that log out, bust everyone's script. Now, the problem with the logout script, though, is if you're mapping one-offs from the client, so you go into payroll and you went and you hard map them from the computer to a folder as opposed to doing it via GPPE with item level targeting, that's going to blow it up. But again, I would personally want it blown up, and then I'd want to implement it GPPE on a central console. That would be my preference because it's easier to manage and understand. All right, again, shared desktops and start menus, 45 to 90 seconds login time. It's bad. If you have anything on those shared desktops or start menus that aren't shortcuts, excuse me, you're going to have death. So you get somebody that copies a 40 meg zip file, and now every user is getting copied down a 40 meg zip file. So the only thing that should be on shared desktops and start menus are shortcuts. You should audit those folders if you're still using that and just make sure. Here's all the things you can redirect, right? So there's desktop. Whoops, sorry. There's desktop. There's start menu. Documents, which we generally, we do that. That's generally a mapping. You can also do favorites. Favorites work pretty well. Like I'll do H/favorites if your home directory is H. Don't like to do app data. That can get you in trouble. So less is more. And again, you go into user policies, Windows settings, folder redirection to do this. So instead of shared desktops and start menus, either just have your shortcuts on the workstations, in your golden image, or use GPPE. GPPE shortcuts. Here's an example from, I think this is Tri-Valley. So it's user configuration, preferences, Windows, shortcuts, and we've created a shortcut for Google Chrome, it was 32-bit Google Chrome, to put it on the desktop. That's the right way to do it. Image considerations. Less is more, right? We used to want to put everything known to man in our images. All right? Every piece of software, everything. Now we don't want to do that. We want our images to be lean and mean, come down quickly. We want to use, SCCM or Alteris or Case or even software distribution to basically push our apps as much as possible into the image after the fact. We want to limit, what's in our startup folders, program data, Microsoft Windows, start menu, program startup. Turn off all unnecessary Windows services. Try to keep the registry small. That's the default profile that gets copied. So the first thing when Johnny sits at a new workstation and Johnny's never sat there and there is no roaming profile, what's going to happen is the default profile is going to copy to Johnny into user.tab into users Johnny. That takes time. How much time? It depends on how big it is. It depends on how good the machine is. So in terms of getting people going fast, less is more. And instead of putting everything known to man in, you know, and doing all that customization stuff, leverage GPOs and GPPE to mass customize machines. And remember, with GPPE, we can do two things. We can do one, which is every time Johnny sits down, blast these things to Johnny's machine, wherever Johnny is in your network. And Johnny sits in the next place, we blast again. Or we could set it to what's known as tattoo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to blast this stuff down to Johnny's machine. And once it's there, I'm not going to do it anymore. So to try to cut the time down, I've done, if you look at some of the webinar recordings, I talk in greater detail about shortcuts and this concept. But tattooing is just, I'm going to get it down there, I'm going to put a shortcut in user's public desktop, and then I'm walking away. I'm not going to run that every time. I'm not going to re-put it there. Whereas non-tattooing, the normal way is just, you're a teacher, I'm going to drop the school tool shortcut on your desktop, wherever you are, every time. Your choice, leverage both strategically. Make sure your antivirus, anti-malware agents are properly configured and exclude items that don't need to be scanned. I talked about at Tech Talk, I think 2 times ago, SCCM endpoint. It was scanning Windows system profile, and it was scanning these CAB files from MBSA reports that it would scan to the end of time. And I had scans running for a week, you know, sucking resource out. And all I needed to do was exclude the folder because there's nothing bad ever going to be in that folder. So, you know, make sure you have that optimized for your applications per vendor guidelines. Microsoft has a nice document on that, on TechNet. There have occasionally been hot fixes that on workstation OSs and server OSs that dramatically improve Logon performance. There's been issues with GPPE, getting confused and forgetting how to map things and getting hung, not realizing it was done and needed to go on. There have been issues with pretty much every aspect of Logon. So you can go and you can look. There were a number in 2008 R2. There were a number in Windows 7. That Windows 7 non-service pack, if you went up to Windows Catalog, I talked about this like, I don't know, a year, two years ago, that they never came out with Service Pack 2, but there was kind of a Service Pack 2 up there if you went manually and got it, and it did have some dramatic effects for Windows 7 in Logon performance. Roaming profiles, again, you know, lose them. Terminal Services has them. You probably have to keep those. Your ClassLink or something like that. It allows mass customization. That's great. Big price to pay. If you're using a FAT client or Microsoft Outlook versus web client, it's the only way for the transient user to get their nicknames and signatures. That tends to be the biggest reason we use roaming profiles, because people freak out if they don't have their signature and their nicknames in Office. Now, if they're using Office Web, if they're using Outlook Web, then we don't care about these things. It's just the FAT Outlook client. And transient user that uses the FAT Outlook client, VDI, for instance. Huge login performance hit. So, you can go check your user. Here's a user. The profile path is the roaming profile. So if you see something here, it means you have a roaming profile. The other thing is, if you need roaming profiles for a specific thing, like to make the FAT Outlook client do nicknames and signatures, what you can do is you can go into this policy, user configuration policies, system user policies, exclude directories, and you can exclude the heck out of everything known to man that's in C:\users, username, app data, right? And it's all with semicolons. So everything you don't need to churn up and down. You don't need their desktop to come up and down. You don't need their start menu to come up and down. You don't need their download directory, their video directory. You know, we just want the nicknames and we want the signature, and we don't need all this other stuff. We don't need huge bloated Java caches to come up and down. You can just sit in this and you can just append and append and append and try to keep as much stuff out of the user profile as possible if you have to use roaming profiles. We check for this in Palo and Sentinel, and I yell at you if I see this. Remember that the share folder that contains a roaming profile cannot be cached. So terminal services roaming profile, class link, or a standard roaming profile. This is the #1 source of corruption, and corruption of roaming profiles is a huge performance hit. A huge performance hit. So we never want the root of the profile share to be cached. Remember that any share that's set up in Microsoft defaults to being cached. So you always have to remember to turn that off on your shares. But like I said, I pick up those alerts. Now, the problem is you say, okay, you convinced me I don't want roaming profiles. My users aren't transient. You know, you could actually pull the, if this is my desk and I sit here every day and I log in every day and log out every day, you can pull the roaming profile from me and I won't even know it, other than I'll log in faster. I should get to that 6 to 8 seconds because all the stuff is already on the workstation, right? So I can just delete that line I showed you and it's just going to get better instantly. And nobody's even going to know that you did it other than, hey, how did I get so fast? The problem you get into is when you remove the roaming profile, if you're moving around, you know, so Johnny's in the lab and sits at workstation 3, now they're in the library and they sit at workstation 5, now they're in, you know, the tech class and they're at workstation 7. What happens is all that first use stuff has to happen. The default profile has to be copied to their profile on the workstation. The Internet Explorer first use, the Microsoft Office first use, the Adobe Acrobat first use, blah, 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 all comes up, and it's really a nuisance. Now, most of that stuff you can go into GPOs and you can leverage that. You can tell Adobe, don't give me the splash screens, don't give me the Euler acceptance screens, you know, just give me Adobe Reader. You can tell IE not to do the first use stuff. So like, one of the problems we have, though, when you pull a roaming profile or don't have it, is that Microsoft Office gives you the prompt for initials every time you start it. There is, for whatever reason, I find this really remarkable, but it's true, that there is no registry key or GPPE key thing that I can set up that can fully fix that. Basically what I have to do is I have to use the Microsoft customization tool, and I have to put a registry key into that, and I have to reinstall Office. And what I can then do is, if I do that, then Office will have those initials pre-keyed in the default profile. So when Johnny gets created, it won't prompt. It's the only way to do it. It's very, very annoying. And lots of times that really irks people. So just realize that. You go back to the Office Customization Toolkit, you add this registry key to the Office install, and then you reinstall Office, and that's how you beat the initials situation. Design considerations. Run computer-side GPOs against computers. Run user-side GPOs against users. Now you say that should be obvious. But, you know, in terms of the early days of group policy and the like, people didn't really get that uptight about these things. And so, you know, you should, you know, have an OU. We've talked about this in other presentations. Have an OU or OUs that are custom, that contain your computers and contain your servers. For whatever reason, you cannot use a default computer OU to put policies against in group policy. So I need a, you know, building A computers OU, building B computers OU that I create, and then I can put policies. But I want to make sure that all the computer policies are running directly against the computer OUs, and all the user policies are running directly against the user OUs, and not waste time putting them in the root where, you know, you're trying to run user stuff against computers, computer stuff against users, because everybody runs out of the root on their way to whatever OU they belong to. One of the questions is there a benefit for disabling the other side? So if I know this is a computer-only GPO, if I go in and right-click and say disable user side, or vice versa, does that help me? You know, and the answer is no, it really doesn't. There's not enough there worth your time to do that. If the computer side is where your stuff is and the user side is empty of that same policy, you're not going to get any benefit of any worth to turn off the user side. Won't hurt anything. It's just that's not your problem. We talked about first use in TPP, losing roaming, losing shared desktop start menus. If I get it too fast, like not saying wait for network, saying async instead of sync, I might not be reliable in getting my stuff. Things like software distribution, you know, I'm pushing out the Lightspeed client. I'm pushing out, you know, the new version of Office. Make things really slow. So try, if you can, to use, don't use folder redirection, but use SCCM or Case or Alteris or something to do your actual deploys of apps. Other things here to consider. Avoid excessive security targeting. Here, let me jump out of this for a sec, and let me go to my domain controller and show you this. If I can sign in. There we go. All right. All right, here's a good example. Here's a default policy. All right. Yeah, look at this one. All right, so here's the Google updater policy. You see how security filtering, it says authenticated users? Now look at this one. This one has a bunch of groups. There's nothing wrong with this, but if I test in this box for security filtering, I'm going to take a performance hit. So how do I deal with that? Well, I deal with it in a couple ways. All right. Again, if you're small and whatever, you know, testing, for stuff is not that big a deal. But the bigger you are, the higher you put things, the more you need to test. So one thing is, instead of putting this up here, I put it down here, right? Put your policies as close to the users as possible. That's number one. All right. And if I put it in the staff OU, I don't have to test that these people are staff, because it's in the staff OU. So inherently, the people in the staff OU are staff. So I don't have to test for staff. So that's one strategy. Get rid of the security filter and push your policy closer to the actual people. The fact that this policy is in staff OU means staff are going to get it. Now, I may relink that policy to teacher OU and so on. So I might relink the same policy 5 different places in the tree, but I've eliminated the security filter. That's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it, which is less, the other thing that's a huge performance hit before I change that, you see this WMI filtering? If I want to reach into the workstation and say, this only is going to work if you're a Windows 10 machine through WMI, that's the biggest performance hit of all right there. So we only do that when we're absolutely required to do that. But if I get into WMI filtering, that's the slowest thing humanly possible. If I have to test, if going down to staff and dropping it here is not good enough and I have to test, what I'd rather do, as opposed to do it there, is I'd rather do it here. Item level targeting. This is the most efficient testing there is. So if I have to test, if dumping it in staff is not good enough, then what I should do is see if I can do it item level targeting via GPPE. Right, so that's what I did. I have a GPPE shortcut. I said item level targeting, and I said if they're a member of the QuickBooks share, then they're going to get that. There's a performance hit for that, but it's less than the performance hit for here. So if I do have to test, GPPE is our item level targeting is our favorite way. Now the other thing, since I'm here, just you see apply once and do not reapply. That's tattooing. Just dump it there once it's there, or walk away. Versus remove the item when it's no longer required. So I'm mapping drive J, but when I don't need drive J and I take this away, it's automatically going to be removed from the system. So let's go back to our thing here. Again, link as close as possible to intended target. The more you change GPOs, the more discrete you should be. So if I always go in and I edit certain shortcuts or certain maps or whatever over and over and over again, I'm always in there changing it to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing, then what's going to happen is that's going to create a massive amount of churn. So what I should do is be more discreet and take everything but the thing I change out of the GPO and have it be separate. That'll give you better performance. There is a setting, computer configuration, administrative templates, system group policy. Don't force GPOs to process even if nothing changes. All it does is slow stuff down. that's the information I had. If you have some questions, I'm happy to take them. If you see the chat box, you can type in your question here, and we have a couple minutes left. So Lisa will